Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Late the W podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mahal. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, all of that fantastic jazz. If it's your first time joining, make sure you follow on social media at Late the W pod on all of that. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, we're active on all of those. So, without further ado, let's sound the horn and get into this episode.
The pitch from Acevedo.
Swung on the line down the left field line for a base hit. Fly ball, gap, right center field.
Double him up at second.
Luke is going back to the 1-8 track. Get out the right, run and Mustard Grandma. It is grand salami time.
will send Seattle to the American League Championship Series for the first time in 24 years.
The world champions are in Seattle. Seattle are world champions. It might not be the Seattle Mariners, but the Seattle Seahawks are world champions. And that has a lovely ring to it, doesn't it? For those of you who are Seahawks fans, it is amazing to see your team win a championship. I must say, I was just a kid last time Seahawks won the Super Bowl, and man, it hit me yesterday. That was an amazing, amazing moment. But we're talking baseball. Pitchers and catchers reporting this week. World Baseball Classic pitchers and catchers reporting, I believe, tomorrow, or when you're listening to this, likely today. Time of recording, 7:33, Monday, February 9th. This will release at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, February 10th. And baseball is around the corner. A week ago, the Seattle Mariners traded for Brendan Donovan. And the question we're entering today's episode with is, was that the last move and somewhat significant move of the off season? We're going to tackle a few different things today. We're going to tackle backup catcher. We're going to tackle bullpen. We're going to tackle whether another bat makes sense for this Mariners roster. I got 4 guys to talk about. We're also just going to sort of talk about where the Mariners roster stands with the guys that they have right now. But again, the Seattle Seahawks are Super Bowl champs. And that was a fantastic feeling, a fun outcome. And I gotta say, it made me miss baseball all the more because the emotions at the end of the game, part of the time, and I kind of hate that I'm like this, but I was thinking, man, this doesn't even compare to the emotions. I mean, it was comparable, but not even really. To the emotions I felt when Eugenio Suarez hit the grand slam in game 5, of the ALCS. It was comparable to the polo. It was better than that, I think. Better than the polo walk-off. And part of it was just that the Seahawks were dominant, and it wasn't like a one moment sort of like emotional, like, giving out all my emotions at once. Whereas, the Geno home run, it was just an outpouring of emotion. It was like everything is gone, and it's like we're on the doorstep of making history. And part of it's that the Mariners have never done that, and the Seahawks, of course, have won a Super Bowl. And while I was young and I don't remember it all that well, it still is. It's a little bit different. And I do just quickly want to touch on Seahawks because, while a Mariners podcast, it's a big moment in a lot of our lives. Those of us who are Mariners fans, a lot of us are Seahawks fans. So those of you who are Seahawks fans, it's an amazing feeling. It really, really is. And Seattle sports are in a really amazing spot right now. And it's really fun. Like, if you had told me 12 months ago that the Mariners would have made it to Game 7 of the ALCS and the Seahawks would have won the Super Bowl, I would not have believed you. Mike McDonald, what a guy. Uh, but we're talking baseball, and I don't want to spend too much time here because there's a lot we have to get to cover today. Um, and spring training starts this week, so there's going to be storylines to talk about. I quickly want to touch on Matt Brash, who's not going to be pitching in the WBC. We'll talk about the WBC, at least I will. I don't know if Jeff will be with me on an episode we talk about it, but I will at least talk about the WBC and who from the Mariners is playing in that, sort of when they have games, what to watch for, stuff like that, closer to the World Baseball Classic. So I don't want to go too far into it, but Matt Brash was not on the Canadian roster, which for a second, I'm not going to lie, raised a worry for me. I did think more than likely it was just a precaution thing, and it was like, we don't want this guy to go pitch in the WBC just like 18 months. I guess it's more than that, more like probably 21, 22 months after getting Tommy John surgery and elbow surgery. So, it was a mixed bag of emotions. I was like, I'm not going to react. I'm not going to say anything. But there was that thought in the back of your head of like, oh, shoot. Are we into injuries already? Like, is this team already going to take a hit? And from the sounds of it, it didn't. It sounds like Matt Brash is okay. He's just going to make sure he takes the slow ramp up. He didn't want to have to force himself to get ready too quick, and it is a risk for relievers. Andres Munoz, Gabe Spire, both in the WBC. So again, that's something we will talk about when we get there. But I do want to use that to base a little bit of this conversation that we're going to have today off of, because my thing with the backup catcher position and a bunch of bullpen stuff is, and that's two of the things we're going to touch on, is that you have guys in the WBC in both those spots, and you have guys that played a lot last year that are now playing early this season. You played as late as you have ever into the season last year. That's the latest these guys have played into a season. And now they're starting their season earlier than most, if not all of them have. I think Munoz is the exception when you're looking at the bullpen, and Cal, of course. So I do want to start this conversation there because there are worries about the amount of innings that Cal Raleigh is going to play this year and that he just played. And the backup catcher position right now is a black hole. It's not Mitch Garver, who I'm going to talk about today, who, while not good last year, you at least felt okay playing some of the time. It's worse than that, even, in my opinion, at least. And that in of itself is a concern, is a worry, and is something that I think needs to be addressed. I don't know if I'm alone in that. I doubt I'm alone in that. I haven't seen a whole lot of people talking about this, especially recently. I think after the Harry Ford trade, people started talking about it. And since then, they've brought in Andrew Kisner. They've brought in Johnny Pareda. They've brought in Brian O'Keefe. But none of these guys are special, have done anything at the major league level, have shown any sort of production above AAA. And you have nobody else in-house, really, that's going to come up and be promoted this year. People have talked about Luke Stevenson. He's not going to be in the majors this year, let alone really in 2027. I wouldn't expect him until 2028 at the earliest. I look at Stevenson and it's like, well, maybe late next year. But this is a guy that's going to start very likely in Everett this year. That's high A. He then will have to show what he can do there and then have to go to double A, which is really difficult to do, and probably show himself, and then of course show himself there. And I would expect him to end the season in double A very likely, especially if he produces at single A. But then if he doesn't produce at single A, then we have other questions. And then that means 2027 for him would look like starting at double A, playing probably at least half the season at double A, and then getting some time at triple A. So he's out of the question for 2026. So that leaves Andrew Kisner, Johnny Pareda, and Brian O'Keefe, none of whom are exciting, eye-popping, name-catching options. They are all underwhelming. They are all a little bit scary. They are all guys that if, God forbid, Cal Raleigh were to go down, knocking on wood, with injury, you would need to go acquire someone because those freaking guys should not be playing 6 days a week, let alone 4 days a week, let alone 3 days a week at the major league level. These are guys where I'm like, should they even be playing once a week at the major league level? And for a team that wants to win, your expectations are to win the division. That's the expectation. That's what you want to do. That is the baseline for a successful season in 2026, in my opinion. Those are not guys I want to be seeing on the field at T-Mobile Park, behind the dish at T-Mobile Park. And maybe one of them randomly pops. But I do not want to take a bet on that. I do not want to put my cards in the corner of Kisner, Pareda, O'Keefe. I would rather put my cards in the corner elsewhere. I mentioned this guy's name earlier in the episode, but Mitch Garver is still a free agent. Spent 2 years in Seattle and was above average against left-handed pitching last year. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Garver because we know who Garver is. But I want to make the case for bringing back Garver on a 1 year, $4 or $5 million deal, maybe even potentially cheaper. What is the harm in that? This is a better option than what you have right now in-house. This is a better market than, or better guy than most of what is on the market still. The question I would have would be, would he want to come back? And it feels it's a little bit like Jorge Polanco, where it's like, well, what is your market right now? You're 35 plus years old. You had 2 bad seasons in a row where you were demoted eventually to backup catcher full time and you were struggling even to produce there. You don't have a good market. Seattle, while a tough place to hit, is a place you know. And while you've struggled there in your career, kind of has died there, like most right-handed hitters. You know the coaching staff, you know the roster, you know that this team can be successful. You probably had fun on the postseason run last year. So I think that there are things in Seattle's favor. And if he wants to come back, he should be back. Because I feel 1,000 times better with Mitch Garver as my backup catcher than Andrew Kisner or Johnny Pareda or Brian O'Keefe as my backup catcher for Cal Raleigh. And those other 3 guys are going to get time in spring training as it looks right now. Cal's going to be away at the World Baseball Classic. These guys are going to get time. Luke Stevenson is going to get time against major league pitching. I used air quotes for those of you not watching on YouTube. I used air quotes for major league pitching because spring training isn't really major league pitching, but same concept. You can sort of show an approach sort of standpoint, and Jerry DiPoto talked about that being a thing to watch for, but that'll be an episode we talk about when games start to roll around for spring training. So for those of you that when you hear the name Mitch Garver, you run and are scared and you don't want this guy and he gives you the ick and all of these different things, I want you to understand that Mitch Garver, well, bad, is a fine backup catcher, especially if he's not being paid $12 million a year like he was the last 2 seasons. So if Mitch Garver's making $4 million a year, I don't think you're complaining. I don't think you can complain. A 1-year, $4 million deal for Mitch Garver is plenty fine for this team. And if you do that, there's other moves you still can make. But why would you not go and make that move for Mitch Garver right now? Why would you not try and bring him back? Well, one of the reasons you might not be wanting to bring him back is maybe you have bigger goals. And I hope this is what it is. I hope it's not that you want to roll with Andrew freaking Kisner. Maybe it's that you have someone bigger that you're trying to trade for. And maybe it's a team that is not going to be competitive this year. It's a guy that's going to be a rental, making $6.5 million. It's a right-handed hitter that was good against left-handed pitching last year. In fact, really good against left-handed pitching last year. It's a guy that produced over 2 wins and is your starting catcher, and that the Mariners could start and play DH more and be able to get Cal off his feet more because this is an actual producer. This guy by the name of Ryan Jeffers. This should be a name you recognize if you are in the baseball world, if you watch baseball, if you pay attention to baseball. This should be a name you recognize. This is the Minnesota Twins starting catcher. He's been one of their catchers for various years now, probably, I think, 5-ish years now. He has 1 year of control, $6.5 million, like I said, slightly over. I think it's 6.7. Produced over 2 wins on Fangraphs last year, was a 113 WRC plus. And has been at over a 100 WRC plus the last 3 years in a row. And produced a 156 WRC plus against left-handed pitching last year. It's a guy that doesn't chase, doesn't whiff, and walks, at least last year, and struck out at an above-average rate, meaning less strikeouts, below 20%, in fact. So I look at Ryan Jeffers. I'll get into a little bit more of his profile in a second. But Ryan Jeffers is the type of guy that you could acquire. Now, the question you might ask is, if you're going to go trade for a bat, why is catcher the position you would do so when you have the best catcher in baseball? A guy who came off the best power hitting catching season, very likely of all time, arguably of all time. Why would you go acquire a starting catcher? Well, a starter. This guy isn't some otherworldly starter. This is like an average starter, in my opinion, around the league. This is a guy that, if anything, should be in a split time where you have 2 guys kind of similar. This guy hit 266, 356, 397 last year. And for the Mariners, this would make sense because Cal Raleigh is playing in the World of Baseball Classic. I've said that numerous times this episode. He just came off a ton of innings, especially behind the plate, because last year your backup catcher was Mitch Garver, who I just gave the case for bringing back, and you didn't feel like you could start Mitch Garver more than once a week because he didn't produce. So if you bring in a Ryan Jeffers, then you feel like, okay, I can give Cal a full day off and still get some production. I can give Cal a DH day and still get production. I could give Dominic Canzone and Rob Refsnyder a day off and have them both off the bench in order to get another guy in there. And Ryan Jeffers torched left-handed pitching last year, and that's been a theme of stuff that you wanted to bring in. And Cal Raleigh, his weaker side is his right side historically. Now, he's really good there last year, but there's going to be regression. I would expect a lot of that regression to come from that right side. So if you get someone that you can pair with Cal Raleigh that torches left-handed pitching, that hits from the right side, that makes a lot of sense. This isn't like the greatest player of all time by any means, and I'm not trying to argue that, but this is an above average bat at the catcher position that gives you some versatility in DH days, in days off, with your catcher and your best player, and even the DH position a little bit. It adds another guy into that mix, which, like, at first thought, you're going to be like, well, why would you want to do that? And it's because he also plays the big position, a primary position, a valuable position in catcher, and he is not this otherworldly defensive catcher by any means. But he's a better framer, at least last year, than Garver was. And 2 years ago, he had a better arm and threw out more runners than Garver did. He was above average in his caught stealings in pop time. So he took a step back. This guy's only 29 years old. It's a younger Mitch Garver, for lack of a better term. It's a younger and actual starter version of Mitch Garver. That's the way I would put it. Younger, better, actual starter version. And he is not going to start for the Seattle Mariners as your starting catcher. But he allows to be able to give Cal days off his feet. And I think that is a big thing that needs to happen this year. And the Twins have no reason not to trade him with a year of control if they get a reasonable package. And I think a reasonable package for this guy is nothing crazy. Nothing crazy. This isn't costing you a top 10 prospect by any means. This costs you a guy in the 15-ish range. Like maybe a couple guys in that range just to give them a couple, pieces. If you give the Twins something, why would they not go and trade this guy? Like I said, he has a year of control, and the Twins are not going to be competitive. The way I based this entire episode was looking at teams that I know are not going to be competitive, that are not trying to win, and looking at guys that the Mariners might be able to acquire from them, because teams that feel like they're in contention are going to be harder to deal with at this point in the offseason, because then they have to go and find a replacement. Unless you give them major league talent, which I just don't see the Mariners very likely doing. So Ryan Jeffers is a name I would keep an eye on as we get into spring training here as an option. Both him and Mitch Garver as options for the backup catcher position, because I really do think that this front office has to look at this backup catcher position and say, yeah, we need a little bit of an improvement. So I would look at Ryan Jeffers and Mitch Garver. Let's move on. Let's talk about the bullpen before we get into one more bat. So let's talk about upgrading the bullpen and whether that's a valid route to go with. So, as it stands right now, you have pretty much two spots in your bullpen that you're like, oh, well, I don't know who's really going to be there, you know what I'm saying. The guys that you have in your bullpen that you know are going to be arms back there. Andres Munoz, Gabe Spire, Matt Brash, Jose Ferrer, Edward Bizardo. You actually have three spots in your bullpen that are up for grabs. Those last three spots are going to go, as of right now, to a mix of Cooper Criswell, Carlos Vargas, Casey Legumina, Robinson Ortiz, Troy Taylor, Alex Hoppe, Josver Zulueta, among even more options. Cole Wilcox, Ryan Lutos, Gio Zuniga, even potentially Austin Kitchen, Peyton Alford, Jimmy Kingsbury. Those last few are less likely, but they're in AAA. They are realistic potential options for the bullpen should they come into spring training and look good. There are spots, and three spots up for available right now. You have a good 5 in your bullpen. Let's make it a good 6. Let's give you someone that you feel decent about being a producer, or that you see upside in, or that could be a bounce back candidate. Free agent wise, it's going to be a bounce back candidate at this point. Paul Sewald, Jose Leclerc, Tommy Kahnle, Evan Phillips, Jalen Beeks. These are all guys that had down years last year or were injured last year. Or mix of both for some of these guys. Jose Leclerc, Paul Sewald are some of those guys that were injured and had down years when they were producing or were there. You also go with a trade route. Jojo Romero has been talked about. That's a left-handed reliever with 1 year of control for the St. Louis Cardinals. Again, you're not contending this year. He has a year of control. You're going to get more right now than you are at the deadline, very likely for a lot of these guys. If you get a package that makes sense, you're going to trade this guy. Because you have no other really choice. Unless you think you're going to get a bigger package at the deadline, which for relievers sometimes is possible. Jojo Romero, though, is a guy we've already talked about. A guy we haven't talked about. 28-year-old right-handed reliever from the Twins, Cole Sands. Cole Sands had a really good season in 2024. Well, a good season in 2024. I don't want to go overboard. It was at least a very interesting 2024 season where he produced some good and interesting and fun numbers, including 3 above average pitches in terms of stuff plus that year. Cole Sands, Minnesota Twins, 28 years old, right-handed reliever with 3 years of control. By no means do they have to trade Cole Sands, which means he'd cost a little bit more. But this is a guy that had a whip just over 1.15, just over that. It was 1.17. He had an over 20% strikeout rate this year and an under 6.5% walk rate. His FIP was about 3.5, and his FIP minus was 15% above league average at 85. He threw 72 innings, and this was a down year compared to his 2024 season, where he produced a whip of 1 and an ERA of 3.28 in 62 games and 71 and a third innings. That 2024 season I mentioned was really interesting. He had an elite walk rate and a really good strikeout rate, a 29% strikeout rate and a 4% walk rate, while a 76% percentile barrel percentage and 82nd percentile chase rate, with above average whiff rates, above average hard hit rates, and his fastball averaged over 95 miles an hour, with xERA and x batting average both above or at the 70th percentile, getting great value out of his fastball. He threw a cutter, a four-seamer, both at about 30% of the time in 2024. He also throws a splitter, a curveball, and a sinker. The curveball is his best off-speed pitch in terms of stuff plus, but the splitter produced really good numbers in 2025 especially. I want to go look at the splitter in 2025's numbers, actually. Opponents hit just 145 with an 184 slug against it this last year, whiffing 20% of the time. Had just 2 extra base hits in 247 times thrown. He threw it 21% of the time this last year. He threw a lower percentage of four-seamers and especially lower percentage of cutters. He went from 29.5% cutter in 2024 to 24% of the time in 2025. And with that came worse results, which is likely why he threw it less. A 29%, nearly 30% whiff rate against the cutter in 2024 dropped to 23%. Same thing happened with the four-seamer. Over 30% whiff rate dropped to 22%. That's likely the reason that his numbers took a dip. He averaged basically a half mile an hour less on each of these pitches. And on the cutter, actually averaged over a mile and a half less. The four-seamer got slugged 526 against this last year. That was the slugging percentage against it, and was again a big reason why he struggled. That said, the cutter still had a 101 stuff plus, and the curveball was a 121 stuff plus, and produced a 30% whiff rate. Some tweaks to this guy, and he could be a solid reliever, and you're not expecting him to be an otherworldly reliever by any means. This would be your 6th best reliever, but would be another name that you can just slot in there and be like, yeah, I pretty much know what this guy's going to give me. I feel confident of what the floor of what this guy's going to give me is. He had 13 holds, 3 saves this last year. And the 2024 season would be the one, if you want to talk about it, to get excited about. That said, if you combine these two seasons and you get the fastball value he got in 2024 and the splitter value he got in 2025, this guy could be a really nice pitcher. And he'd be your 3rd or likely 4th best right-hander in the pen, which means he wouldn't be pitching in high leverage situations at all by any means. This would be a bridge guy from your starter, if they have to exit early, to the back end of the bullpen, And that is a totally fine role to have this guy in. If you forgot, Cole Sands is the name of this reliever, and he is a guy that if I'm the Mariners, I would go look at and see if I can get before the start of this season. You have relievers throwing in the WBC, and you still need another right-hander, and it doesn't have to be a top-of-the-line reliever. It just has to be another guy that you can slot in and feel confident about being at least a middle reliever for you, and Cole Sands is at the very worst a middle reliever, in my opinion. So if you're going to trade for a reliever, just in quick research, Jojo Romero, Cole Sands are two guys that you could talk about that I think both are realistic options to be able to trade for. Cole Sands, the cost is a little bit more difficult, and I don't want to speculate about that because it's so hard to know, and I don't want to give like a false package of what he would cost. That said, is this guy going to cost you any of your like top prospects? No, he's not. So take that piece of it, what you will. Take with that what you will. This is an above average reliever, but is not a flamethrower, is not a closer, is not even really a setup guy. He's a middle reliever, and that's not going to cost you a ton, even for 3 years of control of the guy. Okay, as we switch back to bats, the other route the Mariners could go outside of backup catcher, if they want to improve their roster, their bench, their lineup, is looking at a guy that can play in the infield, is versatile, and has a little bit of upside, but can play and is just a little bit of protection against whether that's regression, injury, or these young guys just struggling to figure it out. It's just an option, especially early in the season, to be able to do so. I talked about this a few weeks ago. Willie Castro was such a perfect option for this. Unfortunately, he's off the market now. Otherwise, I would be banging that hammer on Willie Castro. Ramon Urias is another option that is still out there, and that could make a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of people talk about him. And another guy that could make sense is Luis Rengifo. This is a guy that we know well. He's with the Angels. He is a Mariners killer. This guy that played 76 games at third base, 74 at second base last year. So he fits the two positions that they kind of need another guy at, that they can definitely use another guy at. It's a free agent that's 29 years old, still is unsigned, and is a switch hitter. He can hit really either side. He's been, over the course of his career, better against left-handed pitching than he has against right-handed pitching. But last year, he was pretty much even against the two of them, and was pretty much even against the two of them in 2024 as well. But saw a lot more at bats against right-handed pitching. Before 2025, he had 3 years in a row of a 100 WRC plus or better, and is just a pesky hitter that can put the ball in play and not going to strike out at a crazy high rate. I'm just going to pull up his baseball savant here because I have it already open. But this guy still was above average in terms of that strikeout rate in 2025, despite having a down year. In 2024, if you look at his savant page, he's not qualified, but the strikeout percentage is bright red. He struck out only 14.5% of the time. And if you remember our Brendan Donovan conversations, that's closer to what Brendan Donovan was. Donovan's still better, but close to that. 2023, another season where he was pretty productive. He was in the 73rd percentile in strikeout percentage. He's never been all that great of a defender at either of these positions, but that's not what you're bringing him in to be. You're bringing him in to be protection and depth against a guy struggling, a guy getting hurt, or a young guy just not panning out the way you think he can be, and just being a guy that you can plug in, even if he's not going to be the greatest, best producer for you. In 2024, he was a 118 WRC plus in 78 games, a 763 OPS. 2023, 126 games, he was a 783 OPS. In 2025, he struggled with 622 OPS with a 73 WRC plus in 147 games. And like I said, there's no split advantage left versus right. Rengifo's an interesting option. He was actually above average as a defender at second base this last year, 5 defensive runs saved, and had, I think, 7 maybe outs above average. something around that. It was definitely positive, but was negative at third base, which brought his defensive metrics down, his defensive numbers down, and it was why he was just considered not the greatest defender. He also struck out more than he has some of these other years in his career, striking out over 19% of the time and walking below 6 or just at 6% of the time, pretty much. Like I said, this is not a guy that stats are going to jump off the page, a guy that is going to get you super excited, a guy that's going to be an everyday player for you. But that's not what you need in your infield necessarily at this point, especially if you want to give runway for these young guys to have an opportunity to go in and win a job and to play and to show you what they can do. He's a guy that you can slot in on your bench, has some experience, can play a little bit around the diamond, has even played in each corner a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit. Is a switch hitter, is 29 years old, has a potential bounce back candidate. Is T-Mobile Park the place you want to do that? Of course not. But it is still a potential option, and he has hit at T-Mobile Park a lot in his career because he's been an Angel. So he knows the division, and he has experience against a lot of pitchers in the division, which can come in clutch and can be a big thing, even though it's not the first thing you're going to think about and isn't this big thing that you talk about or think about or even is that big of a thing. But having a guy that's comfortable in the division and has faced division opponents does make a difference, and you feel a little bit better about that than someone that's coming over from the NL Central where it's a bunch of bandboxes. If you forgot the names I talked about, it was Cole Sands, a reliever from the Twins. Ryan Jeffers, Mitch Garver, both catchers. Garver, a free agent. Jeffers from the Twins. Jeffers has 1 year of control. Cole Sands has 3. And I talked about Luis Rengifo as another free agent potential bat you could bring in. Obviously, the most exciting of these options is Ryan Jeffers and Cole Sands. And a deal to bring in both of them would be super exciting. Brings you a backup catcher that you can trust, you can play, and brings you another reliever that, while not a high leverage reliever, is a bridge guy and makes your bullpen and your team better, raises the floor of your team, and just makes you better. Because at this point in the offseason, I don't expect another big move by any means. But I want to make this team better. I want to get this team's floor up. I want to protect against regression, against injury, against guys just not panning out the way you expect them to. Bring in more options. See what other guys can do. Get guys on your 40-man, on your 26-man roster that have the opportunity to produce, that have the opportunity to maybe not be the biggest difference maker, but have some moments and be better than some of the options you have right now, and improve your depth. Push some of these guys that are 4A players to AAA. And then if you have injuries or some of these guys struggle, then they get an opportunity. Instead of being on the major league roster at opening day, instead of being there in April, give other guys an opportunity. And I think that would make a lot of sense for this Mariners team. And I think there are realistic moves to make before opening day. These are moves you can make in spring training. And there are bigger moves that could happen in spring training, of course, as well. There were a bunch of flurry of moves this morning. Jeff Passan even said he expects more moves. So there's the potential for more moves. And some guys, like the ones I just mentioned, whether they're these guys or guys like them, make a lot of sense. The backup catcher position and the bullpen, I think, are the two spots that I would keep my eye on the most to see this team upgrade, because they don't block young guys. And they raise the floor and make your team better without having to be the biggest cost. And they make a lot of sense for this team to bring in guys. But also watch free agents like Paul Sewald. I think Paul Sewald could make a lot of sense for his team to bring him back. Again, not going to be the greatest producer, and he could not be great. But it gives you another option there to see what he has left in the tank. Seattle Seahawks are world champions. Hopefully the Seattle Mariners are up next, and we'll make this a year to remember forever in Seattle sports and in Seattle Mariners history. I will be back Thursday with Jeff. We'll be recording, I believe, Thursday morning, so that'll be out, as always, Thursday afternoon, middle of the day sometime. Until then, as always, go M's, enjoy yourselves, and peace.